What happens when a single antique can rewrite the entire history of one of America's most powerful families? For Maya Rodriguez, a 26-year-old cocktail server struggling to pay her grandmother's nursing home bills, that antique would appear on the most routine Friday evening of her life. For Jonathan Sterling, a man whose real estate empire controlled half of Miami's skyline, it would be the beginning of a reckoning that would expose 4 decades of carefully orchestrated lies. She was simply trying to survive another hectic shift at the exclusive Biscayne Bay Club. He was just another wealthy member accustomed to flawless service and complete privacy. But when she noticed the distinctive silver compass pendant hanging from his watch chain, a fragment of her grandmother's whispered stories would crystallize into devastating clarity. This isn't merely a tale of hidden fortunes or disputed legacies. This is the story of how a Victorian-era silver compass, engraved with symbols of navigation and hope, would chart a course through decades of deception, proving that some family secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever. The crystal-clear waters of Biscayne Bay sparkled like scattered diamonds beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Biscayne Bay Club's main dining room. Maya Rodriguez moved through the elegantly appointed space with practiced grace, her crisp white uniform a stark contrast to the tropical pastels favored by Miami's social elite. The exclusive yacht club had been serving Florida's wealthiest families since 1923, and every polished brass fitting and hand-carved teak panel spoke of old money and older traditions. At precisely 7:45 p.m., as the sunset painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, Maya noticed a distinguished gentleman at waterside table 14 carefully adjusting something at his wrist. Jonathan Sterling was a fixture at the club, tall, silver-haired, with the commanding presence of a man who had transformed his father's modest construction company into Sterling Development, the real estate empire that had reshaped Miami's coastline over the past 3 decades. Maya approached with her professional smile, notepad ready, despite knowing his order by heart. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Will you be having your usual Macallan tonight, or would you prefer to try our new selection of aged rums from the Caribbean?" Jonathan looked up from what appeared to be an antique pocket watch, his steel-grey eyes holding the brief, assessing glance she had come to expect from the club's members. "The Macallan will be perfect, Maya. 25-year neat. And perhaps you could tell me, this compass has been in my family for generations. Does the craftsmanship look familiar to you?" The question surprised her. Members rarely sought personal opinions from staff about their possessions. Maya glanced at what he was showing her and felt her breath catch in her throat. Hanging from Jonathan's gold watch chain was an exquisite silver compass, its case engraved with intricate nautical symbols, anchors, ship wheels, and compass roses, surrounding a central design of 2 hands clasped in friendship. The silver had the deep patina that only comes with age and careful handling, and when Jonathan opened the case, she could see the needle still moved with precision despite what must have been over a century of use. But it wasn't the obvious antiquity that stopped Maya cold. It was the inscription visible inside the opened case, written in flowing script, "Para mi hermano del corazón, always find your way home. Carmen Elena, 1899. The words hit her like a physical blow, transporting her instantly to her grandmother's small apartment in Little Havana, where an identical compass had sat in a place of honor on the mantelpiece, beside faded photographs and religious candles. Her grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, had shown her that compass countless times, explaining that it had belonged to her own grandmother, Carmen Elena Delgado, who had given it to someone precious before fleeing Cuba during the Spanish-American War. Yes, actually," Maya said, her voice barely steady. "My grandmother had one exactly like it. She said it was made in Havana in the 1890s, crafted by a silversmith who specialized in gifts for wealthy families. The inscription was the same, something about finding your way home." Jonathan's whiskey glass froze halfway to his lips, his composed expression cracking like a facade under sudden pressure. "Your grandmother? What was her full name?" "Elena Rodriguez. But her maiden name was Delgado, Elena Carmen Delgado. She always said her family had once been wealthy in Cuba, before the wars forced them to flee with nothing but a few precious possessions. The color drained from Jonathan's face as if someone had opened a vein. His hands began to tremble, and Maya watched in alarm as he set down his glass with the careful precision of a man fighting to maintain control. The few other diners at nearby tables continued their conversations, oblivious to the earthquake that was reshaping two lives at table 14. "Delgado," he repeated, the name emerging like a prayer whispered in a language he had forgotten he knew. "Elena Carmen Delgado from Havana?" "Yes, sir. She died 3 years ago, but she used to tell stories about Cuba, about the sugar plantations and the beautiful houses before everything changed. She said her family had to leave everything behind, including people they loved." Maya paused, studying his stricken expression. Did you know her somehow?" For a long moment, the dining room seemed to hold its breath. The gentle sound of waves against the marina's docks, the soft murmur of conversation from other tables, even the clink of silverware against china seemed to fade into background silence as Jonathan stared at Maya with an intensity that made her feel like she was being examined under a microscope. "Elena Delgado wasn't just someone I knew," he said finally, his voice hollow with a realization that threatened to shatter everything he had believed about his own identity. "According to every document in my family's possession, Elena Delgado was my great-grandmother. The grandmother who supposedly died in Cuba in 1901. Long before my grandfather could bring her to America." The words hit Maya like a tsunami, knocking the breath from her lungs and forcing her to grip the back of a nearby chair for support. "That's impossible," she stammered. "Elena lived until 2021. She raised my mother after my great-grandmother Carmen died in the 1960s. She worked as a seamstress in Miami for 50 years, saved every penny to bring the rest of the family over from Cuba. My family's official history says that Elena Delgado died of yellow fever in Havana in 1901, Jonathan said, his businessman's precision warring with the emotional chaos threatening to overwhelm him. My grandfather, Roberto Sterling, his name was Roberto Delgado before he anglicized it, came to Miami alone in 1902 and built our family's fortune from nothing. He always said he was the only survivor of his family, that the wars and disease had taken everyone else. Maya felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as the implications began to sink in. "If Elena was your great-grandmother and she was my grandmother's cousin, then that means we're family," Jonathan finished, the words carrying the weight of a revelation that would rewrite both their family histories. "You're my second cousin once removed. We share the same great-great-grandmother, Carmen Elena Delgado." Maya pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling to one of her most treasured photographs, a black-and-white image taken at Elena's 95th birthday party, showing 4 generations of Delgado women gathered around the silver compass that had been passed down through their family. Despite the obvious modesty of their surroundings, there was a dignity and strength in their bearing that spoke of aristocratic bloodlines and inherited pride. Jonathan stared at the photograph as if it contained the answers to every question that had haunted his family for over a century. "She looks exactly like the woman in the portrait in my grandfather's study," he whispered. The portrait, he always said, was painted from memory of the grandmother he lost in Cuba. "She kept that compass her entire life," Maya said softly. "She said it belonged to Carmen Elena, who gave it to her brother before he left Cuba. She always wondered what happened to him, whether he made it safely to America, whether he ever thought about the family he left behind." "Roberto wasn't Elena's brother," Jonathan said, pieces of a decades-old puzzle beginning to fall into place. "He was her son. My grandfather was Elena Delgado's son, which means she didn't die in 1901. She gave him that compass and sent him to America alone, or probably to protect him from whatever was happening in Cuba at the time. The revelation seemed to physically stagger Jonathan. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an elegant leather business card holder, extracting a card with the kind of reverent care usually reserved for handling religious artifacts. "Maya Rodriguez," he said, writing her full name on the back of his card. "I need to know everything Elena told you about the family in Cuba, about why they were separated, about what really happened to drive them apart." He placed the card on the table between them, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Can you meet me tomorrow? Somewhere private where we can compare family records and try to piece together the truth. There are things in my grandfather's papers that never made sense until now. References to family members who supposedly died, property that was mysteriously abandoned, money that came from sources he never fully explained." Maya looked down at the business card. Jonathan Sterling, Chairman and CEO, Sterling Development Corporation, embossed in gold lettering beneath a logo featuring a stylized compass rose. The address was in one of Miami's most prestigious office towers, a building she had cleaned offices in during college, but never imagined entering as anything other than hired help. "Why would your grandfather lie about something like that?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would involve the same kinds of painful choices that had shaped her own family's immigrant story. Jonathan's expression hardened, revealing glimpses of the shrewd businessman who had built a real estate empire from his grandfather's modest construction company. Because in 1902, anti-Spanish sentiment was running high in Florida. The Spanish-American War had just ended, and there were laws restricting property ownership by people from certain backgrounds. Roberto probably changed his story to make it easier to establish himself in business, to avoid the prejudice that could have destroyed his opportunities. But that meant abandoning Elena, Maya realized, the full tragedy of the family separation becoming clear. He let her believe he was dead, rather than risk his new life by maintaining contact with family back in Cuba. "And she let him go," Jonathan said quietly, "because she loved him enough to want him to succeed, even if it meant losing him forever." As Maya left the Biscayne Bay Club that evening, the weight of family secrets settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, she realized that her life had just taken a turn toward a destiny that would honor both the sacrifices of previous generations and the love that had survived despite decades of separation. The next evening found Maya in the climate-controlled storage unit where her family kept the possessions that wouldn't fit in their small apartments, but were too precious to discard. Her mother, Rosa Harper, who had remarried after Maya's father's death and taken her stepfather's name, sat in a folding chair among the cardboard boxes, her arthritis making it difficult to help with the search, but her memory still sharp when it came to family history. "You're looking for Abuela Elena's papers again?" Rosa asked, using the Spanish term for grandmother that had been part of Maya's vocabulary since childhood. "You haven't shown interest in those old stories since you were little." "Mom, I need you to tell me everything you remember about Elena's family in Cuba," Maya said, her voice urgent with newfound purpose. "About Carmen Elena Delgado, about the brother who supposedly died in the Spanish-American War. Did Elena ever mention that he might have survived?" Rosa's expression grew troubled, her weathered hands folding in her lap as she delved into memories that had been carefully preserved for 3 generations. "She used to say Roberto was the smart one, the one who could make something of himself if he got the chance. When the Americans came to Cuba and everything became dangerous for Spanish families, Carmen Elena made the decision to send him away." "Send him where?" "To Miami, with friends who could help him start over. Elena was supposed to follow with the rest of the family once Roberto got established. But then," Rosa's voice trailed off, her eyes taking on the distant look that always appeared when she touched on the most painful parts of their family history. "Then what, Mom?" "The letters stopped coming. Elena said Roberto had promised to write every week, to send money to bring the family over once he was settled. But after 6 months, nothing. They assumed he had died during the voyage, or from yellow fever, or from the violence that was spreading through Florida at the time." Maya felt her heart racing as she began to understand the scope of the tragedy that had shaped both families. She never found out what really happened to him. Elena spent her whole life wondering. Even after she managed to get to Miami in the 1950s with your great-grandmother Carmen, she would go to the old Spanish neighborhoods, asking if anyone remembered a young man named Roberto Delgado, who had come from Cuba around 1902. She never found any trace of him. Because he had changed his name, Maya realized. He became Roberto Sterling, and then his son became Robert Sterling, and his grandson became Jonathan Sterling. The family Elena was looking for had been hiding in plain sight for 60 years, running one of Miami's most successful development companies. Rosa stared at her daughter in amazement. "How do you know all this?" Maya pulled out Jonathan's business card, pointing to the Compass Rose logo. "Because yesterday I served drinks to Elena's great-grandson, and neither of us knew we were family until we saw the matching compasses. Working together, they found Elena's treasure box in the back corner of the storage unit, wrapped in protective cloth and smelling faintly of the lavender sachets Elena had used to preserve her most precious possessions. Inside were documents that told the story of a family torn apart by war and reunited by chance, immigration papers, Ellis Island records, and most heartbreaking of all, a bundle of letters that Elena had written to Roberto over the decades, but never sent, not knowing where to find him. But it was a manila envelope marked Family Property, Cuba, 1899, that contained the most shocking revelations. Inside were land deeds, property assessments, and business contracts showing that the Delgado family hadn't just been wealthy in Cuba, they had been one of the island's largest landowners, with sugar plantations, shipping companies, and real estate holdings that would be worth billions in today's money. "Elena never told us we were rich," Rosa breathed, studying documents that showed property holdings stretching across 3 provinces of pre-revolutionary Cuba. "She probably never thought it mattered," Maya said. "All of this was lost in 1959 when Castro came to power. But Roberto left Cuba in 1902. If he took any family assets with him, if he had access to accounts or investments in America, the implications were staggering. If Roberto Delgado had used family money to establish Sterling Development, then Elena's descendants had a legitimate claim to a share of the fortune that company had built over the past century." At exactly 10 a.m. the following morning, Maya stood before the gleaming steel and glass facade of Sterling Tower, a 40-story monument to architectural innovation that rose from downtown Miami like a crystal spear pointed at the sky. The lobby was a showcase of the company's projects, scale models of luxury resorts, planned communities, and mixed-use developments that had transformed South Florida's landscape over the past 3 decades. Jonathan's assistant, a polished man in his 40s, who radiated the kind of professional efficiency that came from managing the schedules of powerful executives, escorted Maya to the executive elevator. The ride to the 38th floor offered breathtaking views of the city, sprawling toward the Everglades on one side and the Atlantic Ocean on the other. Jonathan's office was a study in understated elegance, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Biscayne Bay, walls lined with architectural drawings and photographs of Sterling Development's most prestigious projects. Behind his desk hung a large oil painting of a distinguished man in early 20th century formal wear, the nameplate reading Roberto Sterling, 1880-1955, company founder. But it was the smaller display case mounted beside the painting that caught Maya's attention. It contained what appeared to be antique documents, faded photographs, and in the center, a silver compass identical to the one Jonathan wore. "That was Roberto's compass," Jonathan said, following her gaze. "The one he claimed was given to him by a dying Spanish officer during the war. I never understood why he would treasure something connected to such a traumatic memory." Maya spread Elena's documents across his desk like evidence in a trial for truth that had been postponed for over a century. As Jonathan examined the land deeds and family records, his expression shifted from curiosity to shock to something approaching horror. "My God," he breathed, holding up a deed that showed Roberto Delgado as the heir to sugar plantations worth millions, even by 1902 standards. He didn't come to America with nothing. He came with enough family wealth to buy half of Miami, and he used that money to build sterling development, Maya said, producing bank records that showed large cash deposits into Roberto's early business accounts, deposits that could never be explained by his supposed job as a construction worker. Jonathan sank into his chair, the full scope of his family's deception becoming clear. Elena and her family weren't abandoned because Roberto died or disappeared. They were abandoned because acknowledging them would have meant revealing where his startup capital really came from. It would have raised questions about property that might still belong to other family members. "There's something else," Maya said, producing a letter she had found in Elena's papers. This was written by Carmen Elena Delgado to a lawyer in Miami in 1960, asking him to help her find information about Roberto. The lawyer wrote back, saying that no one by that name had ever registered property or businesses in Miami. Because he was already established as Roberto Sterling by then, Jonathan realized. The family Elena was looking for had legally ceased to exist. Their reunion was interrupted by the soft chime of Jonathan's private elevator. His assistant appeared in the doorway, his professional composure marred by obvious concern. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize for the interruption, but your brother Marcus is here. He says it's urgent family business and demands to see you immediately." Jonathan and Maya exchanged a look of alarm. If word of their discovery had already reached other family members, it could only mean that someone had been monitoring Jonathan's activities, waiting for exactly this kind of threat to emerge. "Send him in, David," Jonathan said, his voice carefully controlled. "And please, make sure we're not disturbed." Marcus Sterling entered the office with the aggressive confidence of a man who had spent his entire life believing that charm and intimidation could solve any problem. He was younger than Jonathan by perhaps 8 years, with the kind of polished appearance that had made him successful in high-end real estate sales and family politics. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored, his smile practiced and dangerous. "John," he said, his gaze immediately fixing on Maya with calculating hostility. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything too important." He gestured dismissively at the documents spread across the desk. "David mentioned you were meeting with one of the club staff about some family memorabilia. How quaint." "Marcus," Jonathan replied carefully. "This is Miss Rodriguez. We were discussing some historical documents related to the family's early years in Miami." "Historical documents?" Marcus's laugh was sharp and cold. "How wonderfully academic. You know, it's amazing how these old family stories have a way of surfacing just when someone finds themselves facing financial difficulties. Nursing home care is so expensive these days, isn't it, Miss Rodriguez?" The casual cruelty of the comment, the way he had obviously investigated Maya's personal situation, made her cheeks burn with anger. "This isn't about money." "Oh, but it always is with people like you," Marcus said, settling into one of Jonathan's leather chairs as if he owned the office. "Distant relatives appearing out of nowhere with touching stories about long-lost connections, hoping the family will open their wallet to make the inconvenience disappear." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a tone that carried more menace than any shout. "But here's what you don't understand about the Sterling family, Miss Rodriguez. We didn't build this real estate empire by being sentimental about every sob story that walks through our doors. We've survived and thrived by being smarter and more ruthless than people who think emotional manipulation can substitute for legal standing." Jonathan stood abruptly, his controlled facade cracking under the weight of what he was hearing. "That's enough, Marcus. You have no idea what Miss Rodriguez has uncovered." "Don't I?" Marcus's smile turned genuinely predatory. "Elena Delgado, the old Cuban woman who spent 50 years looking for family members who were supposedly lost in the war. Roberto handled that situation very efficiently by making sure she would never find what she was looking for, the casual admission that the family had known about. Elena's search all along hung in the air like poison. Maya felt her world tilting as she realized they were dealing with a conspiracy that had lasted for over 60 years. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew she was alive, and you let her spend her whole life wondering what happened to Roberto. We protected Roberto's legacy from an inconvenient truth that would have served no one's interests," Marcus replied smoothly. Elena Delgado was free to live her life in America, just like thousands of other Cuban immigrants. Roberto owed her nothing beyond the fact that they happened to share some distant family connection. But Jonathan wasn't backing down. "There's one crucial detail you're overlooking, Marcus. Elena wasn't a distant family connection. She was Roberto's sister, and according to Cuban inheritance law, she and her descendants have legitimate claims to the family property that Roberto used to establish sterling development." Marcus's confident expression faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that Roberto Delgado didn't just abandon his family," Jonathan said, his voice hardening with determination. "He stole their inheritance. The money he used to buy his first properties, the capital that built this company, it belonged to Elena and the rest of the Delgado family." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Elena's descendants could prove that sterling development was built on stolen family assets, they could claim ownership of a significant portion of the company, potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "You're talking about destroying everything our family has built over 4 generations, Marcus hissed. "You're willing to tear down a company that employs thousands of people, that has shaped Miami's development for a century, all for some romantic notion about honoring a dead woman's memory." "I'm talking about honoring the memory of the family that was stolen from me," Jonathan said quietly. "The family whose love and sacrifice made everything we have possible." Before Marcus could respond, Jonathan picked up his phone. "Security, this is Jonathan Sterling. I need you to escort Mr. Marcus Sterling from the building immediately. He's no longer authorized to be on company property." "You can't do this!" Marcus snarled as security guards appeared in the doorway. "The board will never support you. The family will fight this in court for decades." "Let them try," Jonathan replied. "But they'll be fighting against the truth. And the truth has a way of winning in the end." As Marcus was escorted from the building, still shouting threats about family loyalty and corporate responsibility, Maya realized that their quest for justice was just beginning. But for the first time since discovering the compass's secret, she felt hope that Elena's love might finally triumph over the forces that had tried to erase it. The legal battle that followed captivated Miami's media for over 18 months. The discovery of the Delgado family's original property deeds, combined with bank records showing Roberto's suspicious early deposits, proved that sterling development had indeed been built on assets that rightfully belonged to other family members. Forensic accountants traced the money through generations of investments and developments, calculating that Elena's descendants were entitled to a significant portion of the Sterling family fortune. Marcus Sterling and several other family members were ultimately charged with conspiracy to defraud and obstruction of justice. The civil courts ruled that the Delgado descendants were entitled to damages plus their share of the family trust, a settlement that totaled over $300 million. But perhaps the most meaningful resolution came on a warm spring morning at Woodlawn Cemetery, where Elena Rodriguez had been buried in a modest grave marked only with her name and dates. Jonathan had arranged for a proper monument, its inscription written in both Spanish and English. Elena Carmen Delgado Rodriguez, beloved sister and guardian of family memory, 1926-2021. El amor siempre encuentra el camino a casa. Love always finds its way home. Maya stood beside Jonathan as they placed white orchids on the grave, the 2 silver compasses open between them. their needles both pointing toward true north, like a symbol of truth finally aligned. Her mother Rosa was there too, walking slowly but steadily, surrounded by family members she had never known existed until their shared history was revealed. She would have been so happy to know that Roberto made it, Maya said, closing Elena's compass one final time. She spent 70 years wondering if he was safe, if he had found success in America. Jonathan nodded, his own compass catching the morning sunlight as he placed it beside the flowers. The Sterling family built its fortune on the sacrifice of people like Elena. It's time we used that fortune to honor their memory instead of hiding from it. The Elena Delgado Foundation was established 6 months later, dedicated to helping immigrant families research their genealogy and reclaim lost family connections. Jonathan stepped down as CEO of Sterling Development to run the foundation full-time, while Maya completed her degree in family counseling and joined him as program coordinator. The compass that had started it all was displayed in the foundation's offices, alongside photographs documenting the Delgado family's journey from Cuban aristocracy to Miami immigrants to the inheritors of a legacy that had taken over a century to claim. Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring us home to truths we never knew we had lost. Elena's compass had pointed toward hope for over a century, waiting for the right moment to guide her family back to the connections that had been severed by fear and greed. When that moment finally came, its message was clear: love transcends time, truth conquers deception, and family bonds can navigate even the most treacherous waters of denial and separation. The Sterling dynasty learned that some compasses point not just toward magnetic north, but toward moral truth, and that the most valuable inheritance isn't the wealth we accumulate, but the family connections we preserve and honor. What would you have done if you discovered that your family's fortune was built on assets stolen from relatives you never knew existed? Would you have had the courage to challenge generations of accepted family history, knowing that the truth might cost you everything you thought you owned? If this story of family loyalty transcending time, hidden truth emerging from the shadows of history, and justice being served against seemingly impossible odds moved you, please like and share this video with someone who believes that the strongest family bonds are those that survive even when they're forgotten. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of ordinary people discovering extraordinary courage when faced with powerful forces trying to bury their truth. Hit that notification bell to never miss our latest uploads featuring real-life dramas that prove the most important compass is always the one that points toward home.